Hello, everybody, and welcome to this new episode of my interview series where I'm interviewing successful expat entrepreneurs. My guest today is Sylvia. Sylvia is the head of Europa Recruitment. Sylvia is the founder of Europa Recruitment. And with her today, I'm going to discuss her career, how she started. Sylvia, I'm very happy to have you here.
Happy to be here. Thank you for having me, Federico.
Yeah, thanks a lot for joining. For the ones who don't know you, would you like to tell a little bit more about yourself and how you started?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So, I'm originally from Poland. I am nearing my 40th birthday. Okay, so I'm turning 40 in 2 years' time. Sorry, not in 2 years, in 2 weeks' time. Actually, even next week. And I have been living abroad for far longer now than I have been in Poland. Okay, so it's kind of I've been abroad. Moved to Holland when in 2004 when I was 19. So yes, I've been abroad for 21 years versus 19 years in my home country, and almost begs a question of where is home, right? But so in 2007, I joined a recruitment agency back in Amsterdam. And recruitment used to be very different back in those days, but I fell in love with the industry straight away. It was very different in the aspect where we have so much technology available to us these days, but back in the day, it was all about making those connections and cold calling, for example, which people don't do anymore, right? But yes, so I absolutely loved it. I fell in love with it. Still doing it today, which sometimes is crazy to think. How many years you can spend doing the same thing, over and over. But it's a very live industry, right? Things are changing all the time. Jobs are changing, and the whole industries are changing. That keeps it interesting, right? So for time, for long periods of time. And so back when I started, I believe 2007, 2008. To give you an example, LinkedIn, which is used predominantly by all the recruiters today, didn't really used to be, the main tool for recruitment. Yeah, I believe that there was maybe 13 million users back in that time. I don't know the stats now, but it's well over a billion users, right? In 2025. So it's it's a huge change in the industry since I started. But regardless of that, like I said, it's a brilliant industry to be in. Not easy at times, but yeah, we all know about it. It's ups and downs. It's dealing with people, and the person that you're dealing with is not just the person that you speak with or interview with, right? It's not just the let's say the candidate. Or the client, it's also other decision makers, it's the families of the people, right? It's there's a lot of different moving parts involved in any job related decisions. But yes, so I'm still here today. So with Europa, we do European recruitment. It's various industries, but predominantly consumer related. So everything that we do is in some way related to a consumer. It can be food, it can be commodities, it can be even machinery that then supports the production of the products. And it can be something that's a little bit further away from the food, but it's still grocery channel related, right? So it's there is definitely, like a bonding element, right? To what I've been doing over all those years. And yes, so that's where I'm today. So with Europa, we are located in Amsterdam. At the moment I'm in Spain, but the markets covered are pretty much the whole of Europe, and now actually beyond. We also do Africa and Middle East. We also do Asian markets. But as the name suggests, Europa Recruitment is still very predominantly European agency.
Awesome. Well, one thing that I wanted to ask you, Sylvia, well, there's a lot that I would like to know about, say, how you built a remote team, or at least like the chance to also work remotely. But before we jump into that, I would like to ask you, how did you decide to start to do the switch from working for another agency to starting your own agency?
Right. There were various reasons. I mean, when you work in an agency, if you work for somebody else, you really rely on them doing the right thing sometimes, right? And unfortunately, back when I was with the company that I started with, it was a brilliant experience and a nice way to get me started. But yeah, unfortunately, there were certain things that were just not working. It was kind of, the case of quantity over quality. And yes, as a recruiter, as a salesperson, as anybody, you have to hit your targets. And I totally understand that. I still do the targets today. But, if you put the kind of the quantity over quality, then, things very quickly start kind of, falling apart. You're just not providing the service. Recruiters are service providers. We don't sell a product. We don't kind of, we don't deal with products. We deal with people. So it's kind of, so that service, everything around what we do is super important. And that was the kind of the main motivating factor to kind of, then do it solo, right? And kind of start my own agency.
Right.
I was very lucky
So
because
you were not satisfied with how the other agency was working, but what is it that triggered yourself to start your own company? Because a lot of people might have said, well, then I will go to work for someone else.
yeah, no, true. Well, I was lucky enough because I met my co-founder Mark White. I met him at that time. He was exiting from a business at the same time, just before I did. Actually, it was kind of we didn't really coordinate it sort of to the day, but we were a few months apart from kind of in the business, and it was the timing more than anything, right? So it's kind of we wanted to see if we can create something, knowing what we knew, if we can create something that would kind of then focus on those elements that we both felt were a little bit overlooked in the kind of in the companies where we worked. So it was more kind of trying would our approach actually work and stand the test of time in a real life? Are we kind of kind of forever optimists, and what we think is right just doesn't work in a commercial setting?
You already had some experience from the industry when you started, right? So I guess that probably you already had something that triggered you to do things in a different way. What would you say was your different angle or the different sauce in a way that you wanted to bring to the industry?
A different angle. Well, the different angle was to make sure that the process is looked after from the beginning till the end. We're all in commercial kind of businesses, right? Kind of both you and I and anybody else kind of tries to make it kind of make a living out of it, and of course it has to work from that perspective. You have to kind of make it successful, but not forget the kind of the elements that that may also be needed to kind of keep you there for lengths of time, right? So it was more to do at the time. I mean, now it's kind of things are changing again. You have far more technology, things are far more automated. But back at that time, it was all about the kind of the more kind of human approach almost, right? And making sure that you're not kind of setting anybody up for failure. For example, even simple things like preparing your candidates for an interview, things like that take time. They take time from you potentially business developing, potentially kind of sourcing for another position. So it's kind of would you spend the time doing that and making sure that someone is as well prepared as possible, writing the notes for before, for after the interview. Unfortunately, even today, you cannot really kind of leave it to chat GDP because, it's kind of, it's what you know about a particular client. Maybe they have the quirks that you want the candidate to be aware of. It's you kind of there's no point in me knowing something if I'm not passing that knowledge on, and that was my kind of my feeling that my time, I understand it can be spent elsewhere, but to keep the kind of the wheels in motion, not just for that particular project, but also to kind of to make it a more of a long-term engagement, right? So kind of, you provide the service on all sides of the kind of the interviewing process, right? To your client, but also to your candidates. And that was the difference, I suppose, back in the day where it was all about hitting the numbers, go, 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 like from one call to another, from one email to another, one business development to another. But, I just wanted to kind of, maybe not to slow it down, but just to kind of, to make sure that those other elements done in a proper style. So I'm not setting someone up for failure, sending them to an interview where I know I'm just kind of, spending those extra half an hour with them would help them excel at that kind of, at that interview, right? So I just put a lot of...
Would you say that what was important for you when you started was not just delivering the quick result, but also make sure that you were providing value for the long term to people that you are working with? Do I say it correctly?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's
So,
a good way to put it.
so now let's say you are a few years down the road, right? For how long have you been doing this?
You don't want to know. Way too long.
Well, a few years down the road, I won't ask. And would you say that the original promise was kept? And also curious to know what are the things that you have learned along the way, on which you decided to double down in order to be unique.
What I've learned along the way, I've learned that people are complicated. I think that's the kind of, well, I knew it before, but it's a funny thing where, it's not just recruitment. I think it's kind of, dealing with people in all sorts of kind of, ways of life. But, what people say is sometimes not what they mean. I'm not sure if you have that as well, Federico, sometimes.
Well, it happens every time we work with people, right? Otherwise, we will be being accountants and working with numbers, I guess. And probably they would also tell you that numbers don't always tell the truth.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, I suppose that's right. But no, I mean, of course, it's kind of, let's not make it, totally negative. But, people like to be understood as well. I think people kind of, like to, not be treated as commodity, right? It's kind of, so having those kind of, human sort of, extra sort of, human touches kind of, do help with establishing that connection. So kind of, people feel more prone to open to you, but you're still a stranger kind of on the other kind of end of the screen. But yeah, for sure, it's kind of even in the age of AI and in the age of kind of everything being kind of technological and kind of having all this technology kind of available to you, it's important to kind of to establish those connections, right, and kind of not lose that what we kind of we still have, right, kind of as people. But yeah, that would be probably kind of the biggest takeaway over the years. But I don't think it took me 16 years to understand that. I think I knew it fairly quickly, but it's kind of maybe knowing how to overcome that and how to deal with it in those different situations.
And Sylvia, another thing that I'm curious to know from you, well, you have built a business which is based in the Netherlands, of course, but it kind of allows you to have, I would say, quite a flexible lifestyle that I think a lot of people look at with admiration. And so it allows you, if you want, to work remote and so on. How did you build it? And was it something that was favored by, the last years in which more and more people are working remote, or was something that was in from day one?
For sure. I mean, no, it wasn't like that from day one, for sure not. So back in the day when we're kind of, talking sort of, early 2010, ish, kind of, those days. I mean, kind of, the technology to kind of, to have interviews online was there. We used to, if we couldn't kind of, see somebody kind of, face to face, we would very frequently actually kind of, even back in those days, would use a Skype interview. To be fair, that was really kind of frowned upon. Maybe kind of at the time people thought that you were it was like a weird way to kind of to interview. Obviously, then then the pandemic changed it all completely. Nobody thinks it's weird to kind of to meet in that manner. But yeah, so it's kind of definitely the kind of the way that we collaborate changed completely and entirely. It's 180-degree sort of change. Now at the beginning, during my first 2 years of kind of operating, my customers were very specific about meeting with candidates face to face, right? You'd kind of put far more attention on that, right? You kind of you need to kind of read the body language and make those meetings happen. But it was very clear even back in those days that we're all very busy people. If somebody doesn't want to be seen walking into a recruitment office, right? Kind of so it's for those different reasons that the kind of the Skype interviewing did take off eventually. It took a little bit coercing and kind of for people to kind of understand that it's maybe just a different way, right? It's not a worse way, it's just a different way of interviewing. So yeah, so it took a little while to get there. I mean, these days, if somebody wants to start a recruitment company, you can be located on one side of the world and kind of cater for another side of the world, and nobody would kind of bat an eyelid, right? Because it's like a normal way to do it. So
would you say you have been actually one of the first one, perhaps, to start doing interviews remote?
I don't know if I was one of the first ones, but we're definitely very early sort of, adopters of the kind of, of that technology, right? I'm sure that other recruitment agencies did that. Probably not to that extent, but yeah, quite often if we kind of, suggested that to a candidate, that'll be the first time that they've done an interview in that manner, right? Kind of, with a recruitment agency. But then of course, meeting with the client, client would then be taking place on site. So it's still kind of the face to face would still kind of, be there. These days that doesn't even have to happen either, right? But yeah, but definitely one of the earliest companies to perhaps do it, but I'm not sure if you were the first.
Got it. Yeah, sounds good. Well, Sylvia, I got one more question for you as we wrap this up. As I think so far it has been a very interesting conversation. Great to hear how you started, also what were the things that made you unique, and well, congratulations, quite frankly, for managing to build a business that supports a lifestyle that you like, that allows you to work remote. I think that, and again, it's a lot of things. It's something that a lot of people would like to build, but not everyone really knows how to start. One thing that I would like to know is like now when you look at the clients that like to work with you, like what kind of companies do you usually support? What, yeah, then again, I'm curious to know what do they find unique into your approach so that they can be served at best?
Right. What do my clients like about our approach? I think, to be completely fair and frank, I think we just get the job done. I think that would be
Which
probably
is
kind of,
great.
the biggest thing.
It's a very good way of starting.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you just cannot, yeah, you cannot build anything unless you kind of, you're willing to put in the work. And I think, any industry, remote or not remote, on site, it doesn't really matter. You really have to work at anything that you have, right? And, yeah, getting a job from a client is kind of, I wouldn't even say it's halfway there. I'd say it's kind of, you're 20% of the way there, and then kind of, to be able to successfully close it and make sure that, there's always something that comes up. There's always, troubleshooting, and there's always kind of, things that you need to kind of, that you have to kind of, deal with, right? So it's kind of, being able to sort of, take it from those problem areas and kind of, take it through it successfully. So the client is still happy to work through you, with you, right? Kind of, afterwards. But, it's kind of, it's just putting in the work, and it's kind of, it's not being afraid of also maybe voicing your opinions, and then also knowing when to withhold your opinions, because if your opinions don't add any value, it doesn't really kind of change anything. You still kind of, as a recruiter, and these days I think it's kind of, becoming even more and more important. You are a value adding partner, right? Or you should be, at least. You're not just a CV producing kind of, robot, because you have so much technology for you to kind of, to just do it for you, right? It's being able to kind of, add value, understand the company culture, read between the lines what's the kind of, the client tells you, because sometimes what they want is also different from what they need. And also depends on the market. Sometimes the market just doesn't give you those kind of, perfectly formed, 5-star ticking all the boxes candidates, and that's okay. We're not seeking perfection. So it's kind of, it's just trying to kind of, juggle all those things and kind of, make it, make it through the end.
What I understand from what you said is that there's obviously the part of getting the job done, right? So there's the quality of it, and I guess also it's
Yeah.
coupled by the thing that you said before, which is not just about getting the job done, but also make sure that whatever results you bring will also last for the long term. Well, Sylvia, thanks a lot for your time. It was a brilliant interview, and well, thanks.